In this presentation, we're going to explore how we can incorporate weightlifting exercises into resistance training programs to further enhance sports performance. So first of all, we'll look at why we should include weightlifting exercises and the benefits that these exercises have in comparison to other exercises. We'll explore the effects of exercise variation on force velocity characteristics, followed by the effect of load on force velocity characteristics. Then we'll look at a bit of a summary of how we can piece all the pieces of the puzzle together to try and come up with appropriate methods for integrating these types of exercises in training programs. And then we'll look at a quick example case study of how this could be done with a strength speed phase of training and a speed strength phase of training. So first of all, why include weightlifting exercises and their derivatives? Well, we know that we should do strength training. Strength training really is the foundation of sports performance. Acceleration and deceleration are determined by impulse, and impulse is determined by force and time. And there's a very strong relationship between maximum force production and rapid force production. And if we increase maximum force production, we also increase force production at those early time points. However, this may not be the optimal method for developing rapid force production. Part of the reason is there's a deceleration phase about half the way through the range of motion in a traditional resistance exercise such as a back squat. If you actually start to decelerate, and if you didn't, it would become a ballistic task and you would jump, which you then don't want to do with really heavy loads. So you could argue, why not just use ballistic training? Well, again, the problem there is we can't use loads sufficient to really optimize strength development or force production. We will enhance rapid force production. We're not really going to emphasize that maximum force aspect though. And there's also that issue of, the load and the safety of landing with those high loads if we progress them up to particularly high loads to try and emphasize force more. So if we look at weightlifting exercises, they're really useful. They emphasize rapid force production throughout the range of motion, with deceleration only really starting to occur once you reach standing height, so just before you start to plantar flex. The biggest problem is people aren't necessarily that competent at performing the full exercises. They can't get down into those deep squat positions sometimes to be able to receive the bar as a snatch or a clean. But actually that's not necessarily a problem, because there's a whole lot of weightlifting derivatives, whether that's a power clean or a power snatch or some of the other derivatives that have become popular more recently, that may provide some of these benefits. And as I mentioned, you actually end up accelerating throughout most of the range of motion without that deceleration phase occurring till right at the very end. So there's a huge benefit there. And also, if we look at the benefits of weightlifting in some resistance programs, this really nice systematic review and meta-analysis by Steph Morris, a PhD student at Cardiff Metropolitan University, clearly identifies that there are notable benefits to performing weightlifting exercises or incorporating weightlifting exercises in your training programs. So at the top here, we can see that there's an increase in strength when you include weightlifting exercises. Following that down, we've got an increase in counter movement jump performance. And what we really need to focus on here is those diamonds. The diamonds actually show us the effect size, so the magnitude of improvement of performance. And that's summed across all of those studies with the green squares and the lines. So you've got the green square is the magnitude, the lines are the 95% confidence intervals, and that's a similar representation with that diamond. If the diamond falls to the right hand side, that's a beneficial effect if no aspect of that crosses that zero line. So we see an improvement in strength, an improvement in counter movement jump performance, an improvement in squat jump performance, and an increase in sprint speed. So improved sprint performance. Possibly an improvement in change of direction performance, but as that left hand side of the diamond crosses over the zero line, that's inconclusive. But the addition of these types of exercises seems to benefit not just force production, but actually performance in athletic tasks such as jumping and sprinting. And if we think about this from a historical perspective, we know that we get very, very rapid force production great acceleration, high velocity movements when we're performing these weightlifting exercises. And these figures here all illustrate the same thing. It's the second pull phase. So going from around about mid-thigh in a clean or from the hip in the snatch, that actually optimizes rapid force production. That's where we get the highest force, power, and rate of force development. So if we look at the different exercise variations and we compare starting the power clean from different positions, here we have the power clean from the floor. So with it being the power clean, catching in a shallow squat position. Then we have the hang power clean. This was actually performed from the knee. So it wasn't a hinge down to the knee and immediately return. It was hinge down to the knee, pause for a second, and then perform the task. Mid-thigh power clean, so starting with a bar mid-thigh in that second pull position, and then just a mid-thigh pull, so excluding the catch. And we get high forces, power, rate of force development with all these variations, but what we can see here is the mid-thigh variation results in the greatest force output. If we look at rate of force development, it also results in the greatest rate of force development. And unsurprisingly, if we look at power, we also find that we get the highest power outputs. Now again, this shouldn't actually be surprising because we've reduced the range of motion. We've got to apply a similar impulse, so force times time, but the time and the displacement have decreased. So we've got to produce higher forces and get higher power outputs to accelerate that bar to the same height. The only exception being here is the mid-thigh pull, where actually the final displacement or height of the bar doesn't really matter. And around a similar time, Dr. Tim Sukamel was looking at some research using different weightlifting variations. Now they performed these all slightly differently. So they started stood upright and hinged down to the knee and then immediately returned. So it's the addition of a counter movement here. So start in that upright position, hinge down to the knee, and then performing a hang power clean. So you're catching in that shallow squatting position, performing a jump shrug, where you actually aim to accelerate throughout the range of motion so that you leave the ground, and a hang high pull. So this isn't pulling with the upper body, it's allowing the elbows and shoulders to relax. So once you reach the top of that triple extension phase, the end of the second pull, the barbell continues under its own momentum upwards, and then you use the arms to decelerate it on the way back down. So what we can see from the results of this study, or part of this study, is that the jump shrug results in the highest forces. At the same time, it also results in the highest velocity. Now that's not surprising that you get the higher velocity because the aim on this is to jump. And that means we need to leave the ground with a high velocity to maximize jump height. So again, you accelerate throughout the range of motion. You're not aiming then, like with a hang power clean, to suddenly drop underneath the bar and receive it. So unsurprisingly, if force and velocity are maximized in the jump